Good morning. Welcome to another Astra Group podcast. My name is Conrado and I'm here with James Hartland, who is one of the CEOs of the Astra Group. And to give you viewers out there a bit of a background on James, James has had over 30 years worth of experience working with wills and international estate planning. He's also a pioneer in providing cross-border advice for couples from different backgrounds and religions. He's also employed and runs various businesses in the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. He's also a member of STEP and the CISI and frequently writes articles and does various podcasts, but also speaks at various financial events all over the world. On a more personal note, James is very easy to deal with, keeps things very simple to make it easier for clients to understand the different options, and due to his own experience, can also relate to most issues that clients have to face up to. So James, welcome, and perhaps you can start by telling us about how things have changed with regards to wills and estate planning for the international people and expats over the last 30 years.
Okay, well look, Conrado, thank you very much for the introduction, and also thanks to all our listeners who have tuned in again for our latest podcast. So in terms of your question with regard to change, I guess change is all around us. It doesn't really matter what industry you're in, whether it be sport or technology or banking. The last 30 years we've seen incredible changes, and that would be the same in the estate and trust planning industry. So if we look at various examples of this, so 30 years or more ago, generally if you were an international expatriate and you were going to work out in Hong Kong, Singapore or Dubai or some other country, the postings were normally at a very senior level, and probably they would typically last for 2 to 3 years, and then you would return to your country of origin. And in terms of how that would affect will planning and estate planning, it probably didn't really make that much difference, because in those days people were provided a package and security and insurance by their employer. And as I said, because of the nature of the contract, which was normally short term, there wasn't that much need for them to make changes to their sort of financial plans with regard to estate planning. However, in the last 30 years, as we've seen, that's all been turned upside down on its head. The expatriate worker has completely changed. That role model has basically been turned around. And today, as you and I know, there are people who went out to the UAE 30 years or more ago and who are still living there, who have set up their own businesses, maybe bought property and, invested in various projects and businesses in that country. And we could duplicate that all around the world. People could be in Singapore, have set up businesses there, bought property, Latin America, and also in Asia and Europe as well. And in terms of how that affects our industry, it affects it significantly, because whereas in the old days we would have assumed that people would return to their country of origin after 2 or 3 years, now we can no longer assume that. So more and more people are staying longer in a different location or in multiple locations during their working life. And clearly that has a significant impact on things like wills and estate planning. So the type of impact that it basically has is that, let's say if you're acquiring a business or running a business in somewhere like the Middle East or Asia, how does that affect your estate planning? How are you going to pass that on to those who you love and those who you want to be your beneficiaries? Also likewise, if you buy a property in somewhere like the Middle East, in the UAE, which has Islamic law, it's going to be different to the law of your home country. So you need to work out whether you're going to need a will in the UAE or whether your will in your home country should cover those kind of aspects. So this can become quite complicated for the normal person working and living abroad, and we can't expect them to understand this degree of complexity with regard to estate planning. And that's why, the ability to be able to talk to a financial coach who can understand, the different markets where people come from and how that affects their financial planning, their estate planning is really important. And these changes are happening all the time. So one of the other key changes that we find on a day-to-day basis is more and more clients coming up to us and saying, well, look, I'm a UK passport holder, but my wife is from, Singapore or the Middle East. How does that affect our estate planning and our will needs? Do we need to have a will in both countries? And there is no simple answer to those questions. And we will cover this later on in the interview, but it's very much, we have to take a holistic approach to the different people, what countries they came from, what religion even maybe they are as well, and then how we put together, a will package that will cover the needs of the different people that we speak to. So, and change will continue to develop all the time. And one of the benefits for us of being, a member of STEP and the CISI is that STEP is a global body and it has members all over the world. And we are constantly updated with the changes in the laws in different countries. So when we sit down and talk with clients or business people, we have the information at our fingertips, so we can really help them in terms of making sure that we put the right package together for whatever their needs are.
Well, can we also talk about the importance of taking a holistic approach to wills and estate planning, especially for, expats and those running businesses away from their country of residence?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that really follows on from the first point about, constant change. So generally, a lot of people might rely on their solicitor or their bank manager or someone who sold them a property in their home country, and that person can say to them, I can help you with your will. But the reality is that they can't really if you're an international person. So, you imagine your solicitor in Europe or the UK or the US, how are they going to be able to help you if you have a business interest in a foreign country? Maybe you're married to someone of a different nationality and you also have assets outside of your country. So the reality is, although that they may be able to help you with the assets that you have, for instance, if you come from the UK, in the UK, that person, that lawyer, the solicitor in the UK isn't going to have the knowledge to help you with assets that you hold outside of the UK, which is why it's really important that if you've moved abroad recently, or even you've been abroad for a longer term and you've started purchasing assets outside your country of domicile that we call it, or probably where you were born, that you review it with someone who not only understands the country that you were born in, but the country where you're living and the country where you have assets. So, I'll often meet clients in, Asia who might have properties in Vietnam, Indonesia, the UK and Australia. And expecting one person in one country to be able to put together an estate planning package to take all those assets into consideration is unrealistic. And that's why really you need an international financial coach who understands the complexities of the different areas where you basically have assets. And the easiest way really to get that holistic approach is for the person who's dealing with you to really understand about your full background. So unless you provide, your lawyer or your solicitor or your coach all that information about your background, were you previously married? Is your spouse now the same nationality? Do you both come from the same religion? Do you have kids from different arrangements? Where are your assets? So what holistic means basically is looking at your complete situation, understanding it, trying to see what your objectives are as the client in terms of estate planning, and then putting together basically a package that is going to meet your needs in the future. And I think it's also to understand that we call wills living wills, as you know.
Yeah.
And they're not there forever, and it's possible to change them on a regular basis. So if you have more children, or you buy assets in another country, a good will planner will be able to adapt your will to suit your changing needs. And I think that's important to understand as well. That hopefully that answers your question about the sort of holistic approach, as it were.
Well, thanks for that. Definitely explains a lot. Now, talking about wills, James, recent statistics sadly tell us that, many expats and international people fail to make a will. Could you just go over the different kinds of implications for those who fail to plan, and why is this so important?
Well, again, I would say that's sadly a very good question, actually, because the reality, as you stated, is that the majority of people don't make a will. And we call this dying intestate, basically, which means that you've made no financial provision for what will happen to your estate when you die.
Yeah.
And I find this very sad, actually, because I know it's a difficult conversation to have, with your family or with a professional lawyer or a coach or whatever, but perhaps it's probably one of the most important conversations that people need to think about, especially if you have young children or you live in a complex family where you were married previously. So, if you happen to pass away and you haven't made a will, it not only is there the emotional pain there of the person not being there anymore, but there's the added pain in the sense that you haven't made provision to make sure that your estate passes in a smooth and efficient way to your loved ones. So you can imagine a situation where let's say someone dies, they die in a foreign country. There's no will in place. So what's going to happen with the funeral arrangements? How is the estate going to be divided up? With modern families, as we are all aware, sometimes there may have been another marriage before, previous children as well. And sadly, we've seen from experience that when people die without making a will, it causes a lot of quarrels and arguments within families. And often these quarrels and families, that they remain there for a lifetime. So generally, for most people, making a will isn't actually that complicated. It's something that you can probably, sit down with a coach and do in 2 or 3 hours. And the benefits for doing that is that you as the individual, it gives you the control to exercise what's going to happen to your estate when you're no longer there. So, actually, really, this is perhaps, one of the best gifts that you could give to your family, is preparing them for the eventuality that, we are all mortal at the end of the day. And at some point in time, something's going to happen. So, making a will is really, we feel, very passionate about and it's really essential. So not only, does it cover the points that we've also discussed, but it also involves appointing an executor. And an executor is someone who basically looks after your will and estate. And it can be a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a trusted friend. And again, when we talk about international people, you may need to appoint 2 or 3 executors. So, let's say we take the expat with a family in Asia, but they have assets in the UK or Australia or other countries. They might want to appoint an executor in different countries to handle the different aspects of their estate. So, hopefully our audience will take that on board. And if nothing else happens from this conversation, please go out and make a will, even if it's a cheap, simple will that you can basically do online. Anyhow now, as it were.
Thanks for that, James. This area sounds very complex, and I'm guessing very expensive for clients who wants to make sure that their wishes are carried out on death. Can we discuss this a little more for our audience?
Yes, I think that's actually a misconception that people have, that wills and estate planning is complicated and very expensive. And generally, I would say that that isn't the case, actually. And if you can speak with a coach or a lawyer who understands your needs, generally, as I said, these issues can be resolved, more quickly and more cheaply than most people would anticipate. But because it is an area that people are maybe scared of talking about and don't really want to address, they often assume that it is complicated. I mean, sometimes now with the technology and the changes that we're seeing, couples can even put together a will online. They can go to a digital provider and they can make up their own will. And as long as their situation isn't very complicated, that could suffice. And, that can be very cheap. I mean, I've recently been working with a company in Singapore, and they now have a digital will service for expats and for Singaporeans. And it's very easy, if you don't have a lot of complexity in your life, to make a will in Singapore, to cover your Singapore assets. The other thing that we've seen as well is that, with the changes going on in the industry, countries have begun to understand that they need to change their laws, to encourage further investment, encourage people to see their countries as a long-term base. So, we've seen, for instance, in the UAE that the DIFC recently introduced laws to allow foreigners to have wills in the UAE to cover the assets that they have there, whether it be a business asset, property, or investments. So the laws are changing all the time, and to the outsider it may seem complicated, but if you're dealing with a professional or coach who understands what's going on, generally, as I say, for most families, wills don't need to be that complicated. And again, if we go back to the holistic approach, often there are simple things that clients can do that would mean that if there is a bereavement in the family, the life of the survivors who are going to inherit the benefits is going to be simpler. Mm-hmm. So even simple things, I will often sit down with clients and start asking them about their assets, and they'll say, well, I've got a bank account here and I've got a bank account there. And I'll say, well, look, if you're married, are these accounts in joint names? Because clearly if you have joint names again and one partner dies, as long as you've both written to the bank and said, look, in the event of the demise of one person, we would like the survivor to be able to operate that bank account. These are simple solutions that don't cost any money at all. And often people will say to me, I've got an account in the Cayman Islands or in Mauritius or whatever. Do I need to have a will there as well? And I'll say, no, well, if it's a business account, just make a note that, if something happens to you, you want that account to be continued to be operated by whoever it is. And if it's a personal account, maybe put your wife on it or your partner or whatever. So there are a lot of simple things that you can do that would actually don't cost any money, but are going to make life a lot easier for your beneficiaries if suddenly something happens to you. Yeah. And in our industry, we know this as well. So we'll often work with clients who have taken out, investment policies in, the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, or insurance policies. And we, as part of the holistic approach, as we will ask the clients about the details of their plan. And sadly, often we find that they haven't even appointed any beneficiaries. So, often the purpose of taking out a life insurance or investment policy is that not only do you want it to grow or provide a lump sum for that person, but you want it to be done quickly and easily. So when you don't appoint a beneficiary for your insurance policy or for your investment plan, it actually only further complicates the issue, because that asset, whether it be an insurance plan or an investment, then forms part of your estate. And depending on what country you're domiciled in, that can add up to the tax burden and other fees that you may pay or your beneficiaries may pay on death. So, although there are areas of complexity in wills and trusts and estate planning, there are many simple things that clients can do which actually don't cost them any money at all, to help them get their affairs, in a state of readiness for whatever may happen in the future. And, for the more complicated clients, generally with digital technology, a lot of the costs of setting up trusts and business accounts have actually come down in the last 10 or 15 years. So it's surprising actually, how little it can often cost to do quite complicated estate planning, for even, clients who are, from different nationalities, have assets in different countries. And again, provided you take that holistic approach and you understand, where your assets are and what you're trying to do, generally there can normally be, a fairly cheap and efficient solution to get around most problems.
So, as a financial coach, you don't just provide guidance on wills, but also other aspects of financial planning. Can we just talk about how life insurance can also be used when helping clients with estate planning and the use of trusts?
Okay, yeah, again, I think that highlights the difference between seeing someone who's a single practitioner, sort of a lawyer or solicitor or whatever, who can just help with the wills that you need to do, and seeing someone who's a coach and can look at you on a more holistic basis. So have a look at your overall situation. So obviously, when you're going to sit down and do your wills, it's important to have access to all the information about yourself. What your net worth is, what debts you have, how old are your children, what are your educational costs needs going to be in the future. And all these points are really important, when you do your wills and estate planning. So typically, we would also recommend sometimes the use of life insurance when you're doing estate planning for different aspects of your finance. So, let's say you've got a house back in your country that you intend to go back to when you finished working or retire, and you have a debt on it. So, the kind of questions we would ask when you're doing your will is that, will that debt be paid off by a life insurance policy, or how will that debt be paid off if you die or something happens to you? Because, clearly if you're in a family where only one person is working and the other is looking after the kids or not working, there's going to be a need to pay off any debts on the event of death. And this can also extend to things like business as well. So we work with many clients who perhaps are in business with one or two partners, and their business will have a certain value. And what would happen if something happens to one of those business partners? So how would the family of the person who's died maintain that interest in the business? And generally, again, you would probably need to look at things like key man insurance, so protecting the business interests. So on the death of one of the partners, there was an insurance amount paid, so the family of the deceased would be able to walk away with a lump sum of money from the work, the interest that person had in the business, and the other person would be able to consider continue with the business, as it were. So, life insurance is obviously a very important aspect of financial planning, along with trusts as well. So again, when you're talking about wills and estate planning, it's important to review things like, do you need a trust? And what would be the objective of the trust? So, as you know, we've worked with a number of clients who have, sadly passed away. But what we did for them was that because their spouse or partner perhaps didn't have the financial awareness to be able to manage the funds when they were no longer there, the clients who we've worked with have set up a trust so that on their death, the monies that would, certain monies would then go into that trust, and that trust could then be professionally managed to provide, funds for the surviving spouse and children for often, as you know, decades to come. And again, I think, it's important to emphasize again the importance of, trying to understand the needs of every different client. So all clients will be different. Some will need just simple insurance, and some will need trusts. And that's where, again, having a financial coach who understands, the complexities of your personal situation is going to help you basically achieve, the aims that you're looking to achieve. And the real benefit of the trust is, if you have a young family or whatever, and something happens to you, the trust enables you to control your wealth and to make sure that those who you love and those who you want to continue to support even after you're not around will continue to be supported. So the use of trusts is a very powerful tool for those who want to be able to manage their money even when they're not around, to make sure that their offspring and their beneficiaries have the life that they would have wanted them to lead, as it were.
Okay, I think I understand it a bit more better now in terms of, wills and estate planning. James, thank you for your time. And before we end this session, could you just give us a quick recap of the points we've discussed on wills and planning for the future?
No issues, and perhaps we can highlight a few other points that we haven't discussed, which are coming up regularly nowadays. So, as we all know, change is happening all the time, and we often get asked as coaches or estate practitioners, what do we do now with the crypto assets that they have that we have, whether they be Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. And as we know, in the past, a lot of these assets have been held in complicated wallets where generally only one person has access to that information. And sadly already, even though crypto has been going for a short period of time, billions has been lost as people have died and their beneficiaries have not been able to access those crypto wallets or whatever the tokens were that they had. So, one of the challenges for the estate planning industry is how do we bring these assets into persons' wealth when we're thinking about their future? And again, fortunately, we're seeing change all the time. So as these, assets become more mainstream, it's important for clients who have these assets to sit down and talk with, their lawyer, their coach, their will estate planner, to see how you can bring those assets into your estate and make sure that they can be passed on to whoever you want them to be passed on with the minimum of fuss. I mean, even in the last month, as you and I know, we've seen the changing of these digital assets now so that people can actually own things like Bitcoin, through ETFs, which are daily traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So change is happening all the time, and for those in the audience out there who have crypto and are a bit worried about how they might pass those assets on to their beneficiaries, it's important to review that and see what they can do to make their wishes happen, as it were. And again, this, I think this goes back to a point that we've also talked about on this chat, is that anyone who's out there, who, if you haven't reviewed your will for the last 3 or 4 years, I would strongly recommend you to dig it out and have a look at it, and to make sure that it's fit for purpose. Have you had more children? Have you bought property somewhere else? Has there been a big change in your personal life? And as a result, do you need to upgrade or change your will? And often we'll find that people think that, once they've done a will, that's it. But, as we discussed earlier in the meeting, a will is a living document, and it's easy to make changes at pretty much at any time. And generally, it's normally free or fairly cheap as well to do this. And again, in terms of other points that I think are worth bringing up as well, is sometimes people might be a bit shy to make a will because, if they have young children, they may be worried about who do they appoint as a guardian for their children. So if both parents were to die at the same time, obviously it's not an easy discussion to think about who would you appoint as the guardian for your children. But again, these are perhaps some of the most important aspects of estate and will planning. These things need to be considered because sadly, sometimes these things do happen. And guardians also need to be, reviewed from time to time. So the guardians that you appointed 5 or 6 years ago, you may not have the same relationship now because you've moved abroad that you had with them when you made the will. So do you need to review those guardians? Do you need to change them? And again, I would say it's the same for, executors. Executors carry a very important position when you make a will, and they're the ones who are ultimately going to distribute your estate, to your beneficiaries and loved ones. So, as we touched on earlier in the interview, I think it's important for the audience to understand that, if your lives change and you start moving abroad or buying assets in another country, you may want to change your executors or appoint different executors, to manage the different assets you have. Yeah. And it's important as well that you discuss this with your executors so that they all understand that their role that they might play in the future, in managing your assets when that time comes. And, as life goes on as well, and as your kids grow up, I've seen this as well with clients, is that as their kids grow up and take responsibility, they may even appoint their kids as executors as well. So especially if they go into an area of business that gives them a basic financial understanding, why would you not also appoint your children as executors for your will as well as they reach adulthood. And lastly, I think as well, is for those who are still out there and not sure as to who they would appoint as an executor, in terms of looking after the estate, maybe they don't have parents or brothers or sisters or friends who they trust. Ultimately, you can always appoint a trust company. So as you know, we carry out this service for clients, and also we work with other trust companies in different parts of the world. So if you feel uncomfortable appointing, a sister or a brother or a parent or a friend as an executor, and you want that process to be independent, you can appoint a trust company, to manage your assets after you've gone. And generally there's no cost for that until something actually happens. So again, that's the ultimate peace of mind as well. And it demonstrates that, almost in all circumstances, there is always a solution for those who are out there and who are worried about, their will and how it's going to work out, and making sure, that the assets are distributed in accordance with the wishes of the client, as it were. So yeah, hopefully that summarizes everything. I mean, I think I'd like to thank everyone who's listened into the podcast that we've done today. Please get in touch with us if you have any questions. We're always delighted to help out. And as I said, once again, thanks for listening in. And then until the next time, it's goodbye from me.